they charged. Inspector Ganov put on his best analytical look as his shuttle docked at the station. The old observation post was built almost 600 galactic standard years ago, back during the Federation days, and by this point was well in need of maintenance, despite the best efforts of the automated repair systems. He didn't know much about the primitives down below, as that information was withheld from the public due to several incidents in the past where civilians attempted to make first contact despite Commonwealth guidelines against doing so. Even the location of the system was unknown to him, as he was taken there by a Lay-10 ship currently waiting on a red planet nearby. "Welcome, Mr. Ganov, I'm Director Senov, and I'll be showing you around today," said a remarkably short old Daxian, who, of course, still stood a few centimeters above Ganov's own head. As the two walked around, he noticed that while the interior was still in a workable condition, there were quite a few places where either the old repair bots had done their job improperly or failed entirely, which Ganov noted down into his holopad. "We believe the stealth drive may also need repairs. While it is a newer addition to the station, we did catch a human, the name of the species below, apparently looking at us through an archaic glass telescope, though we don't believe they have any idea what the station even is," Senov said, prompting Ganov to further increase his list of necessary repairs. As the tour dragged on, they eventually arrived at the cafeteria, which he noted had a remarkably extravagant window for a science outpost. The view, however, was undeniably mesmerizing. "What is so special about these humans?" Ganov asked, prompting the director to look up from his bowl of food. "This station is older than me, my grandfather, or even the Commonwealth itself. Surely we'd have uplifted them by now, right?" The director merely gave him a funny look and said, "Come with me to the observatory once we're finished eating, Mr. Ganov. I'd like to show you something," and went right back to his incredibly bland meal. Daxian cuisine was rated one of the most boring in that entire sector, and few could comprehend why they ate curious baked goods called scones as if they were actually tasty. As they finished their meals and walked to the laboratory, Senov intercepted a young Lay-10 going down the corridor. "Careful with the running, Tolek, how's the war going?" he asked, terrifying as always. "Director, we actually think there's a major battle brewing as we speak. I'm trying to get to Mr. Vashik to tell him, sir," the Lay-10 said, a small badge identifying him as an apprentice. "Perfect timing, then, let us continue, Mr. Ganov," as they kept walking up the corridor and into the observatory. Ganov saw a small crowd gathered at the viewpoints, composed of various scientists looking at the surface of the planet and taking notes. As he got close to one, he could finally see what they were studying. Two armies of tall creatures, though not as tall as the Daxians, Mr. Senov accepted, with front-facing eyes that made him shiver slightly. His species hadn't been prey for a long time now, but some primal instincts are seemingly impossible to be completely rid of. Each side wore extravagant clothing, and they also wielded long sticks with what looked somewhat like a cooking knife attached to the tip, which Ganov found curious, as it would have little use in battle. The armies also had exotic-looking metal tubes mounted on wooden wheels. He remembered seeing similar contraptions back in his history classes, as the firework launchers were an essential and flashy tool of power during the First Unification War back on his homeworld. He figured the ones with the most launchers would be the winning force, as no reasonable army would resist fleeing at the sight and sound of the explosions in the air. Aside from the weird knives and a herd of large beasts he saw at the back of the soldier lines, which he assumed were used as transport by the humans, Ganov didn't think anything was off about the battlefield. After all, pretty much everything in there, or a close equivalent, had been used by one species or the other at some point in their existence. That's when the bombardment started. Ganov stared with curiosity, quickly followed by abject horror, as the humans loaded metallic spheres into the firework launchers, and fired them straight into enemy lines. Not above, not on a nearby hill, but straight into their fellow humans. The spheres did not blow up in some flashy display either, but pierced straight through enemy lines, tearing limbs and killing dozens. He could not look away as they did it again and again. It was more death than he had ever witnessed, even in his job that involved touring dangerous, and often malfunctioning, facilities. And they seemed to do so incredibly casually too, as if this was a regular occurrence. Unlike what he expected, the enemies did not run away and surrender either, but stood firm, formations holding. This was, however, only the beginning of the nightmare, as, sometime later, he found out what the cooking knives were for. Ganov gawked as soldiers lowered their wooden sticks in perfect coordination and did what he understood as firing small projectiles like the firework launchers were doing, killing even more of their enemies. Then they charged. The subsequent cloud of smoke, which the inspector was thankful for, made the battle hard to see, but he could still catch glimpses of humans running at each other and piercing flesh with the bayonets, a name he heard one of the scientists muttering. He watched as two soldiers in different colored uniforms wrestled in the mud, the fight ending as one managed to pull a knife from his uniform and pierce the other in the neck. Gawking at the sheer destruction before him, Ganov caught a glimpse of something coming in from the outskirts of the battlefield. The large beasts he thought were merely for transportation were being ridden into battle, mounted by humans wielding long, curved swords. He stared in disbelief as the mounted warriors charged into enemy lines, with some of the animals being killed during the advance and falling over, taking several others with them. After an untold amount of time, a third army arrived, seemingly allied to one of the two already fighting. They managed to sweep up the attacking army until, finally, a retreat was called, and the blue-uniformed soldiers began running away. Ganov looked numbly at his holopad, staring at the several message notifications from the captain of the Lay-10 ship, getting increasingly more rude as hours went by. He didn't realize he had been watching the bloodbath for that long. He keeled over and vomited on the floor. First time, a scientist sarcastically asked as Senov helped him up and cleaned the inspector's former lunch with a suspiciously close-by mop. The researchers were starting to disperse now, most absorbed in their own notes and heading to make their own reports. Senov looked at him solemnly. "Don't feel embarrassed, this happens to almost every newcomer that gets to watch one of those. Happened to me too once." Ganov looked at the director. "So this is why we haven't uplifted them? Because they're still animals?" he asked in disbelief, for surely no sapient species could be capable of such horror. "No, they are very much sapient and capable of both great cruelty and great care. If you look back at the viewpoint, though I understand if you'd rather not, you'll see them gathering their wounded and treating them, even those who will never again be able to work or fight." It was true. The inspector could not fathom such a discrepancy in behavior, and yet they were doing it anyway. "The real reason," Senov continued, "is that we do not know what would happen if we did. Humans represent a fundamental shift in how warfare conducts itself, while also showing unmatched care for their peers. Their arrival onto the galactic stage would cause an unprecedented uproar if not handled properly, and as such we'd rather observe, assess, and be prepared for when they do it on their own." With a dry chuckle, he added, "which might happen sooner than we expect, too. Over my last 60 years on this station they have advanced at such a pace as to leave any reasonable scientist floored." Ganov thought about the director's words as he boarded his shuttle and headed back to the Lay-10 ship and into his room, ignoring the shouting and brand-new curse words he had never even heard before from the captain as he did so. Senov was not lying. What he saw that day was unlike anything he'd ever seen before. A largely harmless affair turned into a massacre of untold proportions. The galaxy would never be the same once the humans found their place within it, and the inspector was unsure if it would be for the better. The end.